Hey there. It's awesome to be diving into this topic with you today because, building a real estate portfolio, it's exciting, but it also comes with, some risks. So we're going to be talking about asset protection today. And from the sources you sent over, it seems like you really want to make sure you're protected as you grow those investments.
Absolutely. It's like, putting on a seatbelt when you're in the real estate game. You don't plan on crashing, right? But it's good to be prepared just in case. Especially with real estate, lawsuits can pop up from unexpected places.
Seriously, I heard this crazy story about an investor who, like, lost everything because they didn't have the right protection. Can you believe that? Makes you wonder how often those lawsuits actually happen.
Way more than you'd think. I mean, think about it. You've got tenants, you've got contractors, even people just walking by your property.
Oh,
It's like anyone can sue these days.
yeah.
But the good news is, with the right legal strategies, you can minimize those risks big time.
Okay, that's both a little terrifying and motivating, right? I got to get this right. So let's jump in. You sent over some info about land trusts, and I got to say, they're a little mysterious to me. What's the deal with keeping your name off public records, and how does that even work?
Okay, so imagine a land trust, like, a package, but it's discrete. The property is held in the trust's name, not yours. So if someone looks up the property, they won't see your name directly linked to it. It gives you that extra privacy, especially useful for those individual properties that, you kind of want to keep on the down low.
Interesting. So it's more about keeping a low profile than anything else. I can see why that'd be appealing, especially if you're growing your portfolio. But what about LLCs? They always seem to be a big part of this whole asset protection conversation.
LLCs, those are like the heavy hitters in the asset protection world. They're not just about privacy. They create a legal barrier between what you own personally and your business.
Okay, now we're talking. So if I'm following you, even if something happens with a property that's owned by an LLC, my personal stuff like my house or my savings, those are protected.
You got it. It's like having separate compartments for your real estate ventures. If one compartment has an issue, the others are safe. Let's say you own a rental property under your own name and a tenant gets hurt, right? They sue. Now, if they win, they can come after your personal assets. But if an LLC owns that property, the liability generally stops at the assets of that LLC.
Wow, that's a huge relief. It's like that extra peace of mind knowing your own finances are safe. Or, now, what about couples who invest together? Anything they should keep in mind about protecting their assets?
There's a strategy called tenancy by the entirety, or TBE. It's specifically for married couples, offering a different kind of legal protection that regular joint ownership just doesn't have.
Okay, this TBE thing sounds pretty powerful. So it's like what? A superpowered joint ownership, but only for married couples.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. With TBE, even if one spouse is sued, and even if the debt is only in their name, creditors generally can't touch the assets held under the TBE.
That's incredible. I get why it'd be popular for couples trying to protect your assets. Now, this Ron LeGrand, he has this system with 4 different LLCs, which sounds pretty intense. Is it really necessary to have that many?
So it is a more advanced strategy, but it can be incredibly powerful as you grow your real estate business. He calls it the 4-LLC structure, and each LLC has a specific job, and they all work together to protect your wealth.
Okay, I'm a bit lost, but definitely intrigued. Break it down for us. What does each LLC actually do?
So we can start with LLCA. This one's unique because it can actually be owned by your Roth IRA.
Wait, my Roth IRA can own an LLC. That's a new one.
It is. It's a powerful strategy because it lets you invest in real estate completely tax-free. But there are very specific rules, and you got to be careful to avoid something called self-dealing.
Self-dealing. That doesn't sound good. What does that even mean?
Basically, you can't use this LLCA to directly benefit yourself. So, for example, you can't live in a property owned by your LLCA, even for a bit, and you can't buy a property from yourself using LLCA.
Makes sense. So it's like LLCA is in its own lane, got its own thing going on. I need to respect that. What about LLCB? What does that one do?
LLCB is all about taking action. It's your hub for shorter-term real estate stuff, like if you're flipping properties or managing your rental income.
So it's like LLCA is the long-term player, the one focused on those sweet, sweet tax advantages, and LLCB is out there making moves in the market. That's pretty cool.
What about taxes with LLCB? Any perks there?
One of the best things about it is that you can deduct business expenses, which can save you a ton on taxes. We're talking things like mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, repairs, even travel costs for managing your properties. Yeah, all those deductions add up, and that means you keep more of your hard-earned cash.
Love to hear about deductions. All right, so we've got our tax-free haven with LLCA and our operating powerhouse with LLCB. What about LLCC?
LACC, that's where you keep your long-term holdings. It's like your real estate vault, where those properties appreciate over time, bringing in that passive income. So LLCC is all about building long-term wealth and enjoying those steady rental checks. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Now, for the grand finale, LLCD. What makes this LLC the hero?
LLCD is your first line of defense, the one that takes the hit if you ever get sued.
Whoa, so it's like the designated driver of my real estate empire, taking the fall to keep everything else protected. Genius. But like, how does that even work in real life?
It all comes down to strategic ownership. You see, LLCD is usually set up to not actually own anything super valuable.
Okay.
So if someone tries to sue you and they go after LLCD, there's really not much for them to take.
Wow, that's some next level planning. It's like you're playing chess with your assets. So with these 4 LLCs, I've got all my bases covered: the tax advantages, the operating power, long-term growth, and then shield from lawsuits. But let's be real, setting all of this up probably involves a ton of paperwork, right?
That's where a good team comes in: a really sharp CPA and a lawyer who specialize in asset protection, especially in real estate.
Right.
They'll help you navigate all the legal stuff, make sure it's all set up right, and help you understand those tricky tax laws.
It sounds like finding the right pros is super important. It's like having a co-pilot and navigator for your real estate journey. Makes you think, even with all the legal protection in the world, things can still go sideways with real estate, right? Like, I've heard some wild stories about tenant disputes and lawsuits.
Definitely. And that's actually where the real magic of LLCs comes into play. Remember that legal separation we talked about? It becomes super important when you're dealing with the often unpredictable world of tenant issues.
Right. So say I've got a rental property, it's owned by an LLC, and then I've got a tenant who decides to sue. In what kind of situations would that LLC actually protect me?
Tons of scenarios, actually. Let's say, for example, a tenant gets hurt on your property, right? And they say it was your fault because you didn't maintain the property well enough. Or maybe there's a disagreement about the lease agreement or their security deposit. Usually in these cases, the lawsuit is against the LLC because they own the property, not you directly.
So even if the tenant wins the case, my personal stuff is still protected because it's the LLC that's liable.
You got it. That's the beauty of it. Now, of course, there are a few exceptions, like if you personally promised to cover a loan for the property, or if you were directly responsible for the problem that caused the lawsuit.
Okay.
But for the most part, the LLC acts as a strong shield for your personal assets.
Phew, that is good to know. It's like having that extra layer of protection in a world that can be pretty unpredictable. Now, Ron LeGrand also talked a lot about the importance of having a fee on, particularly when it comes to an LLC that's owned by a Roth IRA. What exactly is a fee-in and why is it so important?
A fee-in, which stands for Federal Employer Identification Number, is basically like a social security number, but for your business. You need it for all the official stuff, opening bank accounts, doing your taxes, and generally running your business above board. When your Roth IRA owns an LLC, that LLC needs its own FAIN, separate from your own social security number.
Makes sense. It's like giving that LLC its own legal identity. But what about this self-dealing thing? It seems like there are a lot of rules to follow when your Roth IRA owns an LLC. Can you give us some specific examples of what not to do?
Absolutely. Let's say you've got that rental property, right?
Yep.
And it's owned by your LLCA, which is owned by your Roth IRA. You can't just decide to spend a weekend there, even if you usually charge rent. That's seen as you personally benefiting from an asset that's supposed to be for your retirement, and that's a no-go for the IRS.
Got it. So no personal vacations on the company dime, even if it seems harmless. What about if I'm like a handy person and I want to do repairs on the property myself?
That's a tricky one. If you've got the skills and you would normally charge for those kinds of repairs, then you can do them, but, and this is important, you absolutely have to bill your LLCA at a fair market rate. And get this, you need to keep records to prove it. Otherwise, the IRS could come knocking and say you were trying to get a personal benefit from your retirement account.
Okay, so keeping those boundaries clear between me and LLCA is key. What if I have a property that I already own personally and I want to transfer it to my LLCA? Can I just do that? Nope, can't do that. Remember, no special deals or sneaky transactions with your Roth IRA-owned LLC. If you want to move that property into your LLCA, you'd have to sell it, just like you would to anyone else, and at a fair market price.
Sounds like the IRS is serious about this whole self-dealing thing. What if you accidentally break the rules? What happens then?
Let's just say the penalties can be rough, even if it was an honest mistake. We're talking about potentially having your whole Roth IRA disqualified. That means you'd lose all those nice tax benefits, and you might even get hit with back taxes and penalty.
Oh, wow. Yeah, not worth the risk.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established self-dealing is a no-go and following those rules is a must. But going back to those tenant lawsuit stories, what are some common reasons that landlords find themselves in court? You hear about slips and falls all the time. Someone trips on a step that's loose or they slip on ice and boom, they're suing the landlord for negligence. It happens more often than you'd think.
So even if it's a total accident, the landlord is still in trouble. Seems a little unfair.
Well, here's the thing. As a landlord, you've got a legal responsibility to make sure the property is safe for your tenants, right? So that means regular checkups, fixing things quickly, making sure those common areas are well lit and free of anything dangerous.
Makes sense. Sounds like good record keeping is essential here. If something does happen, you'll want proof that you were on top of things.
100%. Keep a record of everything: inspection reports, those maintenance requests, repairs, and any conversations you have with your tenants about those things.
Right.
Trust me, it can be a lifesaver if you end up in court.
Gotcha. Slips and falls, definitely something to watch out for. What else should landlords be aware of?
Another big one is habitability. Tenants have the right to live in a place that's safe and livable, even if it's not written down in the lease.
So we're talking like working plumbing, heat that works, a roof that doesn't leak, that kind of stuff?
Exactly. And it goes further than just the basics. Things like mold, pests, no hot water, those are all considered habitability issues. If you don't fix those problems quickly and properly, a tenant could take you to court over it.
So being a landlord is more than just collecting rent checks, it sounds like. You've got to be on top of things, responsive, and maintain the property up to a certain standard.
Exactly. And you know what can help with that? You guessed it, those LLCs. Because if a tenant decides to sue over a habitability issue, the LLC, as the owner, is usually the one they name in the lawsuit, not you personally.
Huge relief, honestly. It seems like LLCs are way more valuable than I initially thought. Any other, legal landmines landlords should be aware of?
Discrimination is a big one, and it's not just the obvious things like race or religion. Did you know you can't discriminate based on familial status?
Really?
Yeah, you can't refuse to rent to a family with kids or charge them more rent unless you've got a very good reason.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So even if I think, young kids wouldn't be a good fit for a certain property, I can't legally say no just based on that.
You got to be really careful. You can have reasonable rules about how many people can live in a unit, but those rules have to be applied fairly and can't be used to discriminate against families.
Landlord-tenant law is complicated. What can landlords do to protect themselves?
A solid lease agreement is your best friend. Make sure it's well written, covers the rights and responsibilities of both you and the tenant, and can prevent misunderstandings. And you know what else? Document everything. Keep track of all those conversations with tenants, maintenance requests, repairs, everything.
Documentation is key. So we've got that and a solid lease. What about insurance? Is that enough to cover potential legal issues?
Insurance is definitely important, but it's not a magic solution. Liability insurance is crucial. That can help cover costs if someone gets hurt on your property and for legal expenses if you're sued, but it won't protect you from every single situation.
Right.
So think of it this way. Insurance is your safety net, but you also need that strong foundation of LLCs and, doing things by the book to really protect yourself.
So it's about having multiple layers of protection. Got it. Now, let's dive a bit deeper into using a Roth IRA to invest in real estate tax-free. You mentioned that Ron LeGrand is a big fan of this strategy, and he has this whole process for setting it up, right? Yeah, he talks about using a third-party administrator, and it seems like there's a specific reason for that. Can you explain why that's so important?
Using a third-party administrator is key to maintaining that separation we talked about, to prevent those self-dealing issues. Remember, you can't directly manage assets that are held in your Roth IRA-owned LLC. That's where the third-party administrator comes in.
So they're like the middleman between me and my Roth IRA-owned LLC.
Exactly. They handle things like opening bank accounts, taking care of transactions, even signing documents on behalf of your LLC. And they make sure everything is done by the book, keeping that tax advantage status for your Roth IRA safe.
That's a relief. So this four-LLC structure, especially with the Roth IRA part, it sounds super powerful, but also Like, it needs a lot of attention to detail.
Absolutely. This strategy isn't for someone who wants to just set it and forget it. You need to be involved, understand the rules, and work closely with your team of experts to make sure everything is running smoothly.
It really highlights how crucial it is to have a strong team in your corner, especially with something as important as protecting your assets. Now, I remember seeing something about a paper trust in the materials you shared. What exactly is a paper trust, and how does that tie into all of this?
It's kind of like that, yeah. Think of it like, you know those income-generating assets you have, the ones that aren't physical property.
Okay.
A paper trust can help protect those.
So things like, what? Notes from those seller finance deals. Or like if you had royalties from a song you wrote or something.
Exactly. Royalties, stock options, even those mortgage notes, those are valuable, and a paper trust adds this extra layer of protection by keeping them separate from your personal liability.
So say I had a bunch of mortgage notes from those seller finance deals, I could put those into a paper trust for safekeeping.
You got it. It's like you're building a fortress around your wealth.
I like the sound of that.
And just like with land trusts, you'd usually have that paper trust owned by one of your LLCs.
Right. That makes sense.
And which LLC you choose depends on whether those assets are part of your short-term or long-term plan, just like we talked about earlier with
LLC, B, and C. It all comes back to that strategic structuring. Every piece has its place. Now, I remember Ron also mentioned something called foreclosing on yourself. Honestly, sounds kind of crazy. What's that all about?
It does sound a little wild,
But it-
but it can be a really useful strategy in certain situations. Let's say you've got a property and it's got all these liens on it, maybe a mortgage, a judgment from a lawsuit, even a tax lien.
Okay.
Instead of trying to negotiate with all those different lien holders, which can be a nightmare,
Yeah.
you could buy one of those liens yourself.
I see. So you acquire one of the liens, but then what?
Here's the thing. Once you own one of the liens, you might be able to foreclose on the property yourself. And by doing that, you could wipe out those other liens, ending up with clear ownership of the property.
Wow. So it's like hitting the reset button on a property that's all tangled up in legal issues. It sounds risky, but also like very smart if you know what you're doing.
It's definitely an advanced strategy, not gonna lie.
All right.
But it shows how thinking outside the box and really knowing real estate law can create opportunities. But I'll say it again, you definitely want a good lawyer by your side for that whole process.
Absolutely. Makes sense. It seems like Ron's got a talent for finding these like unconventional solutions. But even with those creative strategies, having a good team seems crucial. He talks a lot about the importance of a good CPA.
Oh, absolutely. A good CPA is like having a financial wizard on your team.
Yeah, right.
They'll make sure you're taking advantage of every single tax deduction you deserve, which puts more money back in your pocket. Real estate has some amazing tax benefits.
Right.
But you really need someone who understands the ins and outs of the tax code to help you navigate it all.
That's so true. Taxes can be a huge expense for real estate investors. So having a CPA who can help you legally reduce that burden is huge.
And it's not just about saving money on taxes today. A good CPA can help you plan for the long term, structuring your investments, figuring out your retirement plan, even estate planning, making sure that everything you've worked for is protected for your family down the line.
It's like they're setting you up for success, both now and in the future. This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've covered everything from the basics of LLCs and land trusts to these more advanced strategies, like that 4-LLC structure, and even foreclosing on yourself. It's clear that knowing how to protect your assets is critical if you want to win at real estate. What are some key takeaways you want our listener to remember?
First things first, asset protection isn't just for millionaires. It's for anyone who's serious about building wealth and keeping it safe. Second, don't wait until you're in the middle of a legal mess to start thinking about this stuff. Be proactive. And lastly, remember, you don't have to do this alone. Find a good team, a lawyer, a CPA, a solid third-party administrator, people who know their stuff and can guide you. Such great advice. This deep dive has honestly been a game changer for me. I'm feeling way more confident about navigating real estate investing, and I hope our listener is too. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
You know, knowledge is power. The more you learn about this stuff, the better decisions you can make and the more you can protect yourself in the world of real estate investing. So never stop learning, be curious, ask questions, and find those experts who can support you along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It was a pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Remember, with the right knowledge and a little bit of guidance, you can achieve amazing things in real estate.